Sean Diddy Combs has just filed a brand new bid to get out of jail before his sentencing in a few months. From arguing he shouldn't be locked up for his swinger lifestyle, to highlighting the atrocious conditions at the MDC, to addressing allegations of violence, he is fighting for his life in this new
The room was already suffocating with tension, the kind that makes your chest feel tight and your skin prickle, long before the judge even appeared. And this wasn't your everyday courtroom jitters over some minor verdict. This was the slow, heavy, almost unbearable kind of tension, the kind where you just know something monumental, something irreversible, is about to happen. The air itself felt thick, as though everyone in the room could sense history was about to shift.
Sean Diddy Combs be released from jail? I know I've asked that question before so many different times here on Sidebar, but we have right now a brand new request from his legal team, a brand new filing from his defense team arguing for why he should be released now, after that monumental verdict in his criminal case several weeks ago. Circumstances have changed, and I will tell you what, we did an interview a few weeks back that kind of previewed why and how Combs could be released. It was a bail bondsman that is apparently working with Diddy's team behind the scenes. I'm going to get to that a little bit later, but what I want to talk about right now is this latest letter from the defense to the judge overseeing this case, Judge Arun Subramanian. Remember, this comes after a jury of Combs' peers found him not guilty of racketeering conspiracy, not guilty of 2 counts of sex trafficking, but they did convict him of 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution. He's set to be sentenced on October 3rd. Technically, he could face up to 10 years in prison on each charge. Highly unlikely. Think maybe you might be looking at somewhere to 2 to 5 years potentially. But he could also get time served and be released, although that also seems unlikely. I'll talk about that a little bit later too. Initially, after the verdict, right after the verdict, his defense team petitioned the court that he should be released. He was just acquitted of some very serious charges. The judge denied it. The judge denied Combs bail once again. And remember, this comes after he was rejected bail multiple times since he was arrested back in September of 2024, highlighting the severity of the charges, the violence, and so forth. But now, this is different. Now, what is the defense arguing? I'm going to go over all this in the new letter. I'm going to give my take at the end about whether or not it's going to be successful and whether or not he will actually be released before sentencing in October. So, the defense begins by arguing that Sean Combs should be released in advance of sentencing, and the court has the power to do this. They have the authority, among other things, because you can clearly show, quote, that there are exceptional reasons why such person's detention would not be appropriate. So, what are those exceptions? What are those reasons? What are those circumstances that are exceptional? They highlight several things that we're going to get into. That the charges he was convicted of, we're going to call them the Mann Act violations. That's what it's called under the law. They're not as severe, they're not as egregious as other convictions in other cases. That the sheer fact that he's locked up at the MDC, the Metropolitan Detention Center, for the past 11 months, that in and of itself is a reason for him to be released. These are all exceptional circumstances, and I'm going to get into all the arguments. But first, they highlight the standard, and they argue that to be released under federal law, you need to show 2 conditions. First, the district court must find by clear and convincing evidence that the person is not likely to flee or pose a danger to the safety of any other person or the community if released. Second, it must be clearly shown that there are exceptional reasons why such person's detention would not be appropriate. Now, clear and convincing evidence is a lower standard, by the way. It's not like beyond a reasonable doubt. Anyway, basically, you have to show he's not a flight risk, he's not a danger, and you have to show there are particular, exceptional, unique reasons for why detaining Combs is wrong. We're going to start with the exceptional reasons justifying his release. And they begin by trying to define, well, what exactly is exceptional circumstances? What does that mean? And they argue that case law suggests a court has a lot of discretion to determine whether a particular set of circumstances qualifies as exceptions. And they say, look, Sean Combs, his case, so different from other ones. There has never been, according to them, a Mann Act prosecution like this one before. And this is how they lay it out. Quote, there has literally never been a case like this one, where a person and his girlfriend arrange for adult men to have consensual sexual relations with the adult.
You could hear the faint, careful clicks of cameras in the back, their operators moving like they were tiptoeing through glass, terrified of shattering the fragile silence. Reporters shifted in their seats, eyes flicking from their notepads to their phones, ready to push breaking news alerts the very second the judge opened their mouth. And there, dead center, sat him, Sean Diddy Combs, the mogul, the entrepreneur, the man who who had once seemed untouchable, a cultural force too big to fall. His suit, perfectly tailored, every crease sharp enough to cut, looked less like clothing and more like armor, but no amount of Armani could protect him from what was about to come crashing down. Diddy's eyes moved constantly, scanning the room as though searching for something. A friendly face, an escape route, maybe just a sign that this wasn't real. His legal team sat tight beside him, leaning in to whisper every so often. Their faces, a perfect blend of concern and resignation. They'd fought. Oh, they'd fought. Every argument, every loophole, every shred of legal trickery had been thrown into the mix. But deep down, they knew exactly how this was about to end.
Of a demonstrated swingers lifestyle and has been prosecuted and incarcerated under the Mann Act. Combs and two of his longtime girlfriends had a private, intimate life that is not uncommon today. They're talking about Jane and Cassie Ventura. Quote, "It may not have been common on June 25th, 1910, when the Mann Act, or as it was originally called, the White Slave Traffic Act, was passed, but attitudes about sex and morality have come a long way in the last 115 years. It is worth noting that when the Mann Act was passed to protect the morals and decency of America's women were not allowed to vote. As noted below, perhaps due to the troubling background of this statute, whose history is rich with both racism and misogyny, the Department of Justice has limited its application to those people profiting financially from the business of prostitution and not using it to prosecute consensual adults for their own lifestyles." By the way, we covered this on a previous sidebar. The defense made an argument months ago to have these charges thrown out, called it basically racially motivated, that it was strange that it was being used against a successful black man. That argument didn't work. He was ultimately prosecuted and he was convicted on those charges. Went to swingers clubs and they had threesomes. Miss Ventura consistently expressed interest and enthusiasm in her intimate life with Combs, including what they called freak-offs. Jane and Sean Combs had threesomes too. When Jane and Combs watched pornography together, Jane testified that she contacted two different porn stars and invited them to join her and Mr. Combs. Both Miss Ventura and Jane testified that very often they would see the same men over and over again for years. In July of 2024, Jane testified, for instance, that she suggested to Mr. Combs that they call Paul. Jane explained that she told Combs she, quote, missed Paul. When asked why she said that, she responded, "Because I did." This was a lifestyle, one that both Miss Ventura and Jane chose, one they all, as grown adults, had a right to choose. Like many aspects of sex and intimacy, it was not without its complications, its bouts of jealousy, and at times, its frustrations. But that's the hallmark of any serious romantic relationship, and that is what these were, serious, long-term romantic relationships. By the way, not surprising they're really focusing on this because, again, he was acquitted of sex trafficking. They highlight how the jury didn't find sex trafficking of Jane or Cassie, that it didn't occur. There was no force, fraud, or coercion that was used to induce these women to engage in commercial sex acts. For transportation to engage in prostitution, what he was convicted of, the prosecution didn't have to prove that violence was used or that fraud was used or threats were used. It was just, did you transport these women and men for the purposes of sex work, commercial sex acts? And obviously the jury convicted him of that. And they highlight all the jury found was that there was prostitution, payment of porn stars and escorts. And they highlight that he is a swinger, or under the Mann Act, a John. And they argue he doesn't deserve to be locked up for this. Quote, "Sean Combs should not be in jail for this conduct. In fact, he may be the only person currently in a United States jail for being any sort of John, and certainly the only person in jail for hiring adult male escorts for him and his girlfriend when he did not even have sex with the escort himself." Over the last 75 years, the White Slave Traffic Act has been limited to defendants who cause interstate travel for financial gain through the business of prostitution. That Sean Combs remains in jail for being convicted of being a customer of consensual adult sex services makes this case truly exceptional. Not only is prosecuting the users of adult prostitution services inconsistent with the Mann Act, it's inconsistent with the prosecution policies of the district attorneys of...
This was not going to be a victory lap. The bailiff's voice cut through the heavy air. All rise. And then, like a slow-moving shadow, the judge entered, robes swaying with measured weight. Everyone stood, eyes forward, breaths collectively held in that suspended moment before impact. The judge's face? Pure stone. No kindness, no cruelty, just nothing. And then came the moment every single person in that room had been holding their breath for: the sentencing. No long dramatic monologues, no emotional theatrics, just cold, clipped legal language that hit like steel to the ribs. The charges rolled out. The reasoning was delivered with surgical precision. The list was long. The tone, brutal. Then came the numbers. Years. Not months. Not probation. Years. And not the kind you could sweet talk your way out of. No probation. No suspended sentence. Just a punishment so heavy it matched the weight of every crime the court had declared proven.
Attorney, the great Matt Murphy is with us. Matt, good to see you.
Happy to be here, as always.
Got to ask you your reaction to the verdict. Is it what you expected?
Well, hearkening back to, I don't know, we were talking about this, you and I, a couple of months ago, and I got to say, whether it's fun to be right or not in a case like this, we were both right. This was never a good fit for RICO for a lot of different reasons. And the consent element regarding the sex trafficking was always problematic. And I thought the prosecution here did a good job presenting their case. They did a good job presenting their theory. But when you match in a trial context, when you match like professorial and kind of plotting, which is the way a lot of government lawyers are, versus dynamic and engaging and that personality of the defense, it's always a mismatch. You're always up against it. And the Mann Act, like we talked about, I thought he was going down on that after like the second day of testimony. The problem is, for the prosecution, the Mann Act is a very old law, and it was essentially legislative morality from about 100 years ago, where it was transporting prostitutes across state lines. The intent may have been good. It was essentially a very early version of sex trafficking, but it was really more an attempt to stop prostitution, which is, as we know, never going to happen. So almost every lonely guy in New York City who's going through a divorce, who is having a problem in the dating pool, who has some sex worker drive over from New Jersey, if he buys her Uber or his Uber, theoretically, that's a violation of the Mann Act. So that is it's not the same type of crime. There's no mandatory minimum under federal law. The judge does not have to. Right, they don't have to. Now, it carries up to 10 years per event, so he faces up to 20 years. The prosecution, I think, is asking for 46 months or something like that. They're asking for far less than that.
If the case was, if they had called, let's say, Christina Courtroom, okay, this chief of staff who had been mentioned, I think, by almost every witness, and she said, hey, listen, there was a criminal enterprise, okay? We were all a part of it. Everybody knew what the job description was. My job was to do this. His job was to do this. You think they would have gotten racketeering? If they didn't include Jane, who was arguably the more problematic testimony, I mean, Sean Combs still paying her rent, messages that she was setting up a lot of these sexual encounters. Cassie had messages too that were problematic that showed if we're talking about whether she was a willing participant or not. But if you focus just on Cassie and you didn't call in Jane, or you didn't call in Amia, or you didn't call in a Brianna Bengolan, if you limited the case, and now it's so easy to play, Monday morning quarterback or armchair lawyer here, but do you feel that the prosecution could have won this case if they structured it differently, if they called different witnesses?
That's a great question, and that's something that these prosecutors will literally be wondering for the rest of their lives, for the rest of their careers. They're going to be wondering if they'd done it differently, would the impact upon the jury and would the result have been different. The fundamental problem, I think, is that this was kind of always a round peg in a square hole. The arson, that domestic violence video that we all watched, that's horrific, all of that should have been prosecuted as state crimes in Los Angeles. That as a fundamental, starting point.
Well, they couldn't do it now. It was
For a moment, Diddy was a statue. No blink, no breath, not even the slightest twitch. It was almost eerie, like his mind had left his body entirely, hovering somewhere above, trying to process what had just been dropped on him. And then, just the tiniest shift. Lips pressed tighter, nostrils flared, shoulders tensed. It landed. The realization. This wasn't another PR nightmare he could wash away with a carefully worded statement. This wasn't some dragged-out court battle he could delay into oblivion. This was real prison time. The kind that slices years out of your life and leaves scars you can't ever hide. A gasp slipped from the gallery. A woman sobbed softly. Somewhere, someone muttered, "Oh my God." Behind him, his family clung to each other, wide-eyed, faces wet with disbelief. One reached forward, wanting to touch him, comfort him, but court officers moved in, blocking the contact.
No, of course, the statute is run on everything,
Yep.
but that would have been, he would have been prosecuted for exactly what he did instead of predicate acts into a RICO theory. Now, RICO, as we know, was designed for essentially mafia organization, for organized crime. And the idea is simply because there's a legitimate business, like in The Godfather, they had a legitimate olive oil importing business, and that was but it was still a criminal enterprise. The real thing was the mafia. The real thing was the organized crime surrounding the Corleone family, to use an example that everybody can probably relate to. So simply because their olive oil importing business was legitimate, that's not a defense of a RICO thing. That's the current state of the law. What they did here is they took a business that was always legitimate, Bad Boy Records, that was always and the purpose is to make music and make money. Everything surrounded that. And the defense argument, which they obviously argued very effectively, was that is not a criminal enterprise. So the very first element of RICO has always been problematic from the very beginning. You and I talked about that 2 months ago when this whole thing started. And and the jury, this was a sober jury that the questions were serious and direct. And, they sent that note out regarding juror 25 right at the very beginning saying, hey, this guy's not deliberating. And so this was a serious group. And the Mann Act, they did convict on that. So they were, by the fact that that it was unanimous meant that they were getting along. Federal juries tend to be, in California anyway, we have, they draw our state juries off the DMV database. That's how you get jury duty, is from the DMV. Federally, it's based on voter rules. So it's people who are conscientious enough to actually vote. And you tend to get a more serious class of juror in federal court, which I think is interesting. So to answer your question, it's something that we could kick around for years.
Sure.
But I think the fundamental problem here is that it was always kind of a misfit for a RICO theory. Just like the sex trafficking, sex trafficking requires fraud, force, or coercion, right? So that essentially is the same elements of rape. So you essentially, it's transporting somebody under circumstances that equate to rape. Is something forceful, something fearful. That it just doesn't fit very well here, especially when you're talking about all these people they're orbiting him. They're all trying to advance their own career. And when the defense attorney got up and said, Cassie got $30 million as a result of her settlement, right? And that was a big move.
Yeah, I wasn't sold for that personally, because I was like, the prosecution came back and be like, she already settled. What's her incentive to come here and lie? What's her incentive to be a part of this? And that for me, but I think the messages, the conduct that arguably contradicts someone being a victim, and I know there's complicated factors between an abuser and a victim, the trauma. I get it. I totally understand it, but I wonder if that's what settled the jury. Okay, I want to move past the verdict because now we have to talk about what's happening next. First thing, when the sentencing hearing is going to happen. So they have this hearing next week about whether to expedite the sentencing, happening before October 3rd. If both sides agree, great. If they don't, what is a compelling legal argument for the defense to say, we want this sentencing to happen much sooner?
Well, we know that behind the scenes, what they want, of course, is they expect a chance that he's going to be released. So that's their big motivating factor, of course. Whether the court abides by that, it is a...
His lead attorney leaned in fast, murmuring in low, urgent tones, words like appeal and next steps drifting out. But Diddy just shook his head slowly. Not a number, not defiance, just disbelief, like he still couldn't make himself believe that this was his life now. The judge wasn't done. No pauses to let the drama sink in, no softening of the blow. Instead, the reasoning came, deliberate, pointed, and crystal clear. This wasn't random. This was a message, not just to Diddy, but to the entire industry, to the public, to anyone who believed their fame could wrap them in a bubble of immunity. And oh, did the message land? Outside, phones buzzed as breaking news alerts blasted across the world. Diddy sentenced to years in prison. Social media ignited instantly. Hashtags tied to the case rocketed to the top of trending lists. And those grainy phone videos from inside the courtroom, they started circulating almost instantly, catching every flicker of his expression as stone turned to shatter.
Correct a sentence and I'm told that it's often successful for the purpose of correcting when there's a clerical error in the sentence. Now, assuming Combs has valid legal grounds to support any of this, I imagine he will file whatever motion he can for relief from either the verdict or the sentence. Then again, I don't know. He got a very favorable ruling. Obviously, he was convicted. He's not entirely happy with it, and his defense counsel explained that. But they also, in their press conference after the verdict, they were jubilant. They were ecstatic. And I wonder if he gets a favorable sentence, is he even going to challenge this? I mean, they seem happy.
Yeah, they seem ecstatic because the emotions that kind of ran outside of the courtroom, it was kind of double that inside the courtroom, where all the defense attorneys were hugging, they were crying. So seeing them outside in the press conference, all kind of holding hands, going up, that was just a little slice of the cake from what we all saw inside that federal courtroom. But I think it can kind of go both ways, and that's mainly because Sean Combs is still behind bars right now. The judge didn't grant him bail even after the verdict, and I think his reasoning might give us a little kind of picture into what the sentencing might possibly look like, because the judge even pointed out during his denying of Diddy's bail after his conviction, which were on counts 3 and 5, kind of talking back to what had happened in June of 2024 with Jane and the violent altercation that happened over at Jane's apartment. And so I'm thinking, if the judge is already kind of on his mind about the whole domestic violence aspect and the physical violence that was exuded from the defendant, even just last year, I think it's possible maybe the judge, even if he hears from the family, even if he hears from Sean Combs' friends, that it's possible it might be kind of a little bit of a tougher sentence than maybe the defense was expecting.
Well, look, I think the defense might be wanting to take advantage of this, right? Now, the judge said, even though I'm denying bail and I'm looking at the violence factor, it's not a preview of what I'm going to do for sentencing. But I think this is the opportunity for the defense to submit any kind of mitigating factors and have the probation officer speak to his friends and family and talk about the impact of this. I mean, we just interviewed Charlucci the other day. So I wonder if they're saying, you know what? They said to Sean Combs, listen, let's wait for October. Gives us more time to present our case to Judge Arun Subramanian. And then we had the hearing today. This monumental hearing.
Was great.
You've been in court for 8 hours a day, 10 hours a day.
Yeah.
This was what, like 7 seconds?
I think maybe even less than, I would say,
What
kind
happened?
of close to 5 minutes. So get all the way down to the courthouse. I'm like seeing everybody
Which
from
is not
the trial.
close from here, so people know.
It's not. It's not. And it was hot outside too. So
all the way downtown,
walking all the way down, or not, I didn't walk all the way downtown. From the subway to the walk to the courthouse.
Okay.
Get there, check in all my stuff. I would say the security check-in was longer than the actual hearing.
Okay.
So it was a remote hearing. We didn't see Sean Combs in person. We didn't see any of the attorneys on both sides. We didn't even see the judge. And so what had happened was we get inside kind of the overflow room.
Oh, the overflow room, okay.
Yep, so we get inside the overflow room. There's a big, giant screen. It's completely black, but then you hear Sean Combs' voice being like, Mark, are you there? And so it was kind of like one of those dial-in type of hearings. And so we heard Mark Agnifalo's voice. Then all of a sudden we hear the prosecution's voice. It was Christy Slavic. She was accompanied by Emily Johnson, both who work on behalf of the government. And then all of a sudden, Mark Agnifalo was kind of like, you know what, we were able to work everything out as far as our sentencing date goes. And then the judge's clerk is like, oh, okay, so both parties agree, and then this matter is adjourned.
And that was it.
Yeah.
I worried that's what was going to be, because when they had the letter basically working out the date, I was like, oh, what are they going to talk about? And then after that hearing is when they switched it back to October 3rd.
Yeah.
So not much there. You didn't see Sean Combs. Okay. Let's talk about some other things that have been going on. First of all,
Everyone was dissecting it. Some said it was arrogance finally crumbling. Others saw a man broken. Supporters screamed injustice. Critics called it long overdue karma. Sean Diddy Combs, the man who once ruled the entertainment world, now sat like any other defendant, suit sharp but eyes heavy with dread. The judge came in again, the room stood, and the proceedings rolled forward with no fluff. The verdict was done, only the sentence remained. And when it came, it was ice-cold finality. Years behind bars. No mercy. For a second, he didn't move. Then, like a ripple over still water, it hit him. Jaw tight, breath sharp. This was his reality now.
Of what sentencing could be like. Now, to be clear, my understanding is Judge Arun Subramanian even said at the point, if I make a decision on release, it's not indicative of where I'm leaning towards sentencing. I know there's a pre-sentencing investigation still being conducted, or has been conducted. There's a lot of factors to consider. But I have to ask about whether this is going to, have an effect on sentencing. Do you believe it's going to have an effect on sentencing? Does it give you a preview of where the judge is lining up? Because my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, you are probably going to be arguing for time served, maybe a minimum of 21 to 27 months. Where do you think the judge is going to go here?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you have to take each step at a time, and that the judge is not going to prejudge that. There's a lot more information he needs to get, not only the pre-sentence report, but we're going to make a very fulsome sentencing submission, and he's going to have, a much more detailed picture. Even, the trial was about the charges, right? And he doesn't have the full picture of all the factors about Sean's life that he's going to consider. There's going to be a big fight about the sentencing guidelines. We think actually we're going to end up arguing for an even lower guideline range than we had originally believed at the time of the verdict, where we didn't have we had like a couple of hours to try to figure out what to say about bail. So, I hope the judge will grant bail, but I feel confident that even if he doesn't, it doesn't necessarily mean he's not going to sentence Sean to time served. He's going to take everything into account when he gets all the submissions. And, I've got a lot of confidence that the judge is going to be fair and not prejudge the situation.
And you also have this motion for judgment of acquittal, that the Mann Act convictions should be tossed out, Combs be granted at a minimum a new trial. Number of very interesting arguments that are present, and it's basically that there has really never been, as we talked about, a prosecution conviction on a Mann Act like this, that Combs wasn't profiting off of the business. There were all consenting adults that were involved. The jury didn't find that there was any sex trafficking, that this isn't even prostitution per se, it's more voyeurism, that the intent wasn't for people to travel for sex for money, but paid them for their time. They were all having a good time. There's a First Amendment argument that the freak-offs and the hotel nights were performances that were videotaped so he could watch them later. It's amateur pornography. There's an argument that he was prejudiced because of all the other evidence that came in to prove RICO or sex trafficking, but would never have come in if this was merely a prosecution for the Mann Act violations. Specifically, we talk about the Intercontinental Hotel footage. But couldn't the counter argument be, if you look at the text messages and voice notes and the travel, hotel, the payment documentation, that these charges, the Mann Act charges, could have been proven based on that evidence alone and not anything else about racketeering or sex trafficking?
Well, I think that goes, I don't agree with that. I think that, as we argued in the papers, the government didn't really show that the purpose of the travel was to have sex for money, and that in fact all the testimony and a lot of the other evidence showed that the men were being paid for their time. But even if we were wrong about that one, we have a number of the other arguments that you mentioned that really aren't undermined by those records. So for instance, one of our main arguments is that this statute, which used to be called the White Slave Traffic Act, it has this long history, but even with this long history, it's never been applied to a case like this. The term prostitution in a lot of states doesn't include this conduct, even if someone's being paid. If the person making the payment is paying essentially to observe other people having sex, that's not prostitution. So we've got
now each one of these plaintiffs bears the burden of proof. So this was not only a huge win for him criminally, this was a big win for Sean Combs when it comes to all those pending civil suits, because now those same people, in theory, would have to come in and testify. And remember, Don Richard is a good example. The cross-examination of Don Richard was excellent in my assessment. And I trained young prosecutors for years on how to do cross-examinations. I've taught it in law schools. That cross-examination was biting and it was really good. So now Don Richard, in her case, she's been really, ripped apart, I thought, on cross-examination in this case. So now she's kind of wounded. Her civil suit is, her statements are all admissible in that. She really, there's some things she said on the stand that I think were very harmful to her case. She can still proceed with that. But if I'm her plaintiff's lawyer, I would be trying to find some sort of settlement and number. Who knows? These people, there's a lot to be said for this idea that they were all jumping on the bandwagon trying to get money. I think that argument, most judges are going to allow the defense to make that argument. I think that some of them will settle. Some of them may still go to trial.
Well, let me ask you this real quick. If they don't settle, real quick, would he just try to get rid of them as quickly as possible? Does he say, first argument is I'm going to try to anybody who's testifying, anybody who's suing me under a pseudonym, I'm going to try to convince the court that they can't proceed under a pseudonym, because if they now have to reveal their names, maybe they'll be like, okay, I don't want to move forward. Or does he just move for a motion to dismiss on all of them? Can he try to group them together? I know I'm asking like complicated, like how to deal with 66 lawsuits at once, aside from the money that's going to go into it.
Yeah, each one of those cases will have its own individual merits, and each one will have to be addressed separately. So yeah, he's going to have to pour a lot of money into his legal fund, but he was looking at life in prison. So how much of his fortune will go into defending all those lawsuits? Probably a substantial amount, but as we know, the guy has been able to pick out good musical talent and also good legal talent.
Yeah, and it does become a question what his career will be like after. Okay, before I let you go, I have to ask you about this new lawsuit that just came out. We're talking lawsuits. So there was a lawsuit that was filed just 2 days ago. This is a lawsuit filed out in California State Court. Edmund Laurent, former exotic dancer, he's filed a suit against Combs and a Jane Doe and other unnamed people, listing causes of action of assault, battery, intentional infliction of emotional distress, negligence, sexual battery, civil conspiracy, aiding and abetting, violation of the California Civil Code. Laurent alleges that he was this star model, this actor, this bodybuilder who was highly sought after for music videos in the 1990s and 2000s, like with Tupac, Dr. Dre, Britney Spears. Actually, embedded in his complaint are pictures of him with various celebrities. And then he mentions he rarely consumed alcohol, he didn't do drugs. He claims he was friendly with Sean Combs, having seen him on music video shoots. But then he alleges this. He alleges how he did some work as this male entertainer for bachelorette parties. And on one occasion, he arrives at an LA hotel where Combs and Jane Doe are wearing masks. He performed a private dance. A few days later, he claims he gets another call for Combs and Jane Doe. He alleges that Jane Doe propositioned him for sex. Combs purportedly said he wanted this and how much it turns him on to see a man having sex with his girl, so he agrees. Laurent alleges that he kept on contacting him, and on another visit, Combs and Jane Doe unmasked themselves, asked him to apply excessive amounts of baby oil. They allegedly spiked his drink. He claimed on another occasion he applied baby oil that was tainted with GHB, and during sexual intercourse, Jane Doe broke the condom that he was wearing on purpose with her fingernails, despite him previously saying he didn't want to have unprotected sex.
The room broke into a low buzz, gasps, whispers, "Oh my gods," weaving through the air. A muffled sob here. His family gripped each other like the floor might vanish beneath them. His lawyer leaned in, whispering rapid-fire advice. Diddy shook his head, slow, almost ghost-like. He had survived decades of storms, scandals, and shadows, always slipping free. Not this time. The judge, unmoved, kept speaking, each sentence another nail in the coffin of his freedom. Evidence cited, offenses emphasized. Outside, news anchors were already live. Social media was on fire. His stunned stillness was looping on every timeline. This wasn't just one man's fall. This was a crack in the myth of untouchability. And then came the moment that will live forever. Court officers moved in. Diddy stood, adjusting his suit jacket. Maybe his last act of control for a long time. His eyes swept the room. Family, press, judge. Gone was the defiance. All that remained was resignation. The click of handcuffs rang out. Sharp, cold, final. He flinched, just a little, but enough for every camera to catch. In that sound, the image of Diddy the mogul shattered. What walked forward now was Sean Combs, inmate to be. As the doors shut, the air seemed to rush out of the room. Outside, chaos. Reporters shouting, fans crying, protesters yelling. Inside, somewhere deep in that courthouse, Diddy took his first steps toward a cell. And the world won't forget this. Not because another celebrity got sentenced, but because it was proof, rare proof, that even the powerful can face true consequences. His career? It may never recover. His legacy? Stained forever. And if history has taught us anything, it's this. When one domino falls in this industry, others are quick to follow. The empire has cracked. And here's the thing. What happened in that courtroom didn't just belong to Diddy. Oh no, this was the kind of fall that sends shockwaves down the whole industry food chain. Whispers had already started. The kind of whispers that curl into rumors before the ink on the judgment is even dry. People asking, who's next? Whose skeletons are about to come tumbling out now that one of the biggest gatekeepers has been dragged into the light? Because let's be real, Diddy wasn't just another chart-topping artist. He wasn't just another name in the headlines. He was the man, the connector, the power broker, the one who could make or break careers with a phone call. His network, a tangled web stretching from the biggest rap artists in the game fame to politicians in power, to boardrooms of global brands. That's why, as court officers flanked him, and he rose to his feet with that slow, almost choreographed adjustment of his suit jacket, you could feel the moment locking itself into history. He swept the room one final time. And if you looked closely, you could see it in his eyes, that silent acknowledgement that this is it. Then came the metallic crack of the handcuffs, louder than you'd think, louder because of what it meant. And for just a split second, the man who had built an empire flinched. Cameras caught it from every angle, freezing the exact frame when Diddy the mogul died, and Sean Combs, the inmate, was born. As the doors shut behind him, the noise outside erupted. Reporters shouting questions over each other, fans screaming his name, protesters jeering. Security strained to keep the chaos back. Inside the courthouse, though, it was silent again. Silent, except for the quiet acknowledgement passing between those who truly understood what had just happened. The untouchable had been touched. And here's the kicker. This isn't the end, not even close, because in this business, one big takedown is never just about the person in the spotlight. It's about the dominoes that will follow. And trust me, the first one just fell.